How are you, folks? And you're very welcome back to the Irish Unity podcast, 20th of April 2020. We're also trying to bring things onto a visual plane tonight for the first time, so be prepared for a few glitches maybe. What we're going to cover tonight, and we're still in the middle of this dreadful COVID pandemic, so best wishes to everybody and salutations to the NHS staff and all the frontline health workers, HSE staff also. We give a particular acknowledgement tonight, being a Republican podcast as it is, to the late Pat McManus of Republican Sinn Féin. Pat was a frontline health worker based in England who sadly lost his life, so I'm sure we'll all send our condolences to Pat's family and to our friends and comrades in Republican Sinn Féin. Tonight we're going to cover a sticky one. We're going to cover the Irish far right. More specifically, we're going to set out to counter the lies of the Irish far right, to debunk some of the myths that they're running around the country floating. What we're not going to do, we're not going to give any attention to these guys themselves. We won't be posting anybody towards any organisations or even mentioning the names of individuals. We're not going to give them that type of oxygen and publicity. But we are going to set out to debunk some of the many lies that they are currently throwing out there. I'm going to speak to David Hopkins down in Kerry. David's a student, he's an anti-fascist activist, and he's a lifelong Republican Socialist. I'm also going to be speaking to my friend Michael McLaughlin up in Strabane, who's going to speak about the realities of conditions for migrant workers and the dynamics that come into play, exploitation, etc. And finally, I'm going to speak to Stephen Cummins, former Republican Socialist prisoner down in Dublin there, of course. So we're back. My good friend Michael McLaughlin up in Strabane, County Tyrone, has agreed to join us again. Michael's a lifelong Irish Republican and Irish Republican Socialist, and by virtue of that, a committed anti-fascist. How's it going, Michael?
Grand, Kieran. How are you keeping?
Grand. Still under house arrest, bored, stupid, and doing this. Michael, you made a good point earlier. You wanted to make a point about oil prices to start out with, yeah?
Here, we're just seeing this evening here now the collapsing of the oil price, and this is the beginning of the macro recession, the pandemic recession. So just when we were talking about the rise of the far right and the timeline and the lineage of the rise of the far right, it's important that we don't make the same mistakes we made in 2008. And looking at Ireland and the rise of the far right, it's useful to go back to 2008, Kieran.
Yeah.
It's useful to look at what was happening then and how the left were switched off, yeah, and allowed the far right in Ireland to grow. Like 2008 began the landslide of austerity. You know, the left, the collective left, were caught chasing our tail, fighting every cut. Yeah. We were involved in trade union movements. We were involved in community movements, community groups, organising communities, trying to combat the landslide of austerity.
Yeah.
And that for over a decade. So we were kind of guilty of being switched off to the rise of the far right, and we were guilty of not popularising socialism.
Yeah.
Now, the left were taking actions against the state. We're organising. We're fighting the cuts and whatever. And behind the scenes, these people were growing.
Yeah.
They were organising online. They were getting funded. And they were building connections and networks. And they were using really, really simple language and really simple ideas that resonated with workers who were directly affected by neoliberalism and austerity. Workers who naturally were left, or naturally belonged to the left. The right quite cleverly honed their message in and attracted those people. Like they used migrant workers, immigration, all those issues, simplified it to attack the migrant worker or attack the immigrant, instead of looking at the real key problem. Where I can speak about Strabane in the sense that, like, Strabane's like a traditionally huge high unemployment level, deprivation area, but there's manufacturing work in Strabane. There's jobs, there's factories, they exist, they're there. Now, what we see happening here at a local level is migrant workers are being brought in by the capitalists and the bosses who run these factories to work for a lower wage than the local workers, and the kind of the racism and the kind of the far right mentality kind of comes from letting the bosses and the capitalists off the hook and blaming the migrant workers themselves for coming in to be basically slaves. So it's the far right have been successful in decomplicating a complex idea. Do you know what I mean?
That's right. That's I want to sort of take them on in layers here. Let's dissect first their claims to be patriots. Yeah, because like none of us are Wolfe Tone, like none of us are Francie Hughes, and never will be. Yeah, been around republicanism, both of us, like most of our conscious lives. I don't remember any of these people in any march, rally, riot, prison wing, anything.
Well, Kieran, see from 1969 up until like the contemporary here and the now, people getting what they put deportation under the specials and getting remanded membership for 4.5 years, stops and searches that we're all experiencing, the house raids and the black propaganda and the tabloids and the media,
the misery, the struggle,
the everything that encompasses being an anti-imperialist and trying to fight for a vision of an Ireland that belongs to everybody. Where are these people?
No idea.
They don't exist in that world or in that plane of existence. They're irrelevant from it. No, they're not a threat to the state.
Yeah.
No, they're like.
But there's an element of cheek, like, I mean, there's an element of real cheek. You know, like we've just relatively recently, you know, come out of one of the longest prolonged periods of national liberation conflict that our poor nation has ever seen, and these guys abstained, to a man and to a woman, abstained in every possible way. And do they not see the irony of the fact that they are surely viewed as like worse than draft dodgers by now popping up and trying to prostitute our flag, trying to prostitute our national identity? They're not so good at prostituting the language, they don't seem to have a word of it. But how dare they?
Oh, here, I totally agree. And not only that, Kieran, but building alliances with far right English nationalists, British nationalists, building political alliances with people like Jim Dawson and organised loyalism, and having a ex-British soldier as their key person, their key articulate person in Ireland, and you know, like we failed by letting them grow, but the reason we failed, we can't be too harsh on ourselves, because we were trying to take on the world, and in a sense, like we were fighting against neoliberalism, austerity, and we're fighting against the British occupation in whatever way that we could politically, and we're organising our communities. We were involved in the trade union movement. We've taken our eye off the ball for a while in relation to the far right, and they've kind of grown like a cancer in the background. But like I'm completely and utterly confident that as their heads start to emerge above the parapet, people are going to realise the threat that they are, and I believe that they won't last long. Like,
what like let's bring me into the second myth, right? And that is that they are on the side of Irish workers, right? They'll say we're on the side of the Irish worker. Now, while completely negating what comes second nature to us as Republican Socialists, that is the class analysis. Doesn't need to be explained. We know that in the background is the boss class. We know that in the background is capitalism manipulating things in a certain way. Now, these people will very deliberately leave the class analysis out.
100%, man. Here, you look at a migrant worker here, like the most exploited and the marginalised of the most exploited and marginalised people.
Yeah.
Like someone that has to come from their own country, the Ireland, they work in an industry where it's below the national minimum wage. The working conditions are horrific. It's modern day slavery. No self-respecting Irish worker would even entertain these types of working conditions.
Yeah.
Yet the bosses and the capitalists bring them in, they pick their strawberries, they work in the manufacturing industry for lower wages than the local people. Now, the bosses and the capitalists have no reason to stop racism. Like why would they take the spotlight off these people who are being utterly exploited at every opportunity and put it on them, who are the real enemy of Irish workers? No, there's no reason to do that, and these types of trends of thought that be encouraged, because what these far right people are talking about is replacing one hierarchy with another hierarchy, where the Republican left are talking about having a classless society where we're all equal. Now, why would the state will move towards fascism as easily as anything? No, it's probably their natural place they go.
Yeah.
So, like, the myth's dispelled if you scratch the surface of it. You know, there's like if African people want to come here and work and live, that's fine. But when an African or a migrant worker or somebody, whenever they come into the country, it should be compulsory to be a trade union member when you're in your place of employment. It should be compulsory to work for the same conditions and wages as everyone else. It should be compulsory that the best person for the job gets the job, not the person that's going to work for the cheapest money. Do you know, that's like real capitalism at work, exploitation. Like, we're all being exploited to some level in the society. But we need to stop the far right trying to blame these most exploited people. Sleep like here, me own self, like in here, and loads of local lads here around West Tyrone and South Derry and everywhere. Like, we have to go to England to work. You know, there's been years of my life where I've had the up sticks and go to Middlesbrough or Bristol or Derby or Brighton or London or whatever. No, to get the coin in for the family. Like, we do it ourselves. Like, there's no right of any Irish person to exploit or blame or shame another worker for having to come here to make a living. It's the bosses and the capitalists who are at fault.
I spoke to Donzo there last week about this. Councillor Gary Donnelly, and he made a great point. He said, if you look at the roll of honour now of frontline healthcare staff across the border in England who are dying due to this terrible COVID outbreak, it's a litany of migrant workers. Like, these are people who have come from their own homes, abandoned all that they hold dear to come and help people, and are getting slaughtered.
Yeah.
You know, like, who would dare? Like,
100%. Like, and like, see, and generally speaking, any time that these kind of, like, these far right people, like, one of the key far right people in Donegal or in the northwest, one of their organisers, like, he lives in his man's bed, in the bedroom in his man's house, like, in his 30s, like, you know, he doesn't understand life or doesn't.
Well, a lot of them. Let's touch on that there, right? Because you're talking about people who can be nasty, who are happy enough to deal out nastiness. Like, well, a lot of these people appear to me. Some of them appear very clever and want to carve out a political position for themselves. Some of them are just appear to want donations after donations. There's another middle element, and it appears to be people who are malcontents, like, you know, people with personal issues, you know.
Yeah, it's the same. It's the same. They're always selling something here. Like, they're always, it's the same as the 5G people. Whenever you watch their YouTube videos or whatever, at the end of every YouTube video, they're selling a meter to measure the radiation in your local street for $2,000. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So there's always a hook with a snake oil salesman. And And these people are snake oil salesmen. No, they're selling ideas on YouTube videos, and they're selling like concepts that are as far from reality and as far from any real scrutiny as you can possibly get. They're really simplifying complex ideas and complex socio-economic conditions down to the very lowest common denominator, and they're exploiting people. No, they're exploiting the Irish working class as much as the capitalist bosses are. Like, they're exploiting people's fears. They're like, I've no doubt that the Republican left and the left have taken our eye off the ball in relation to the far right in Ireland, but we have seen some decent mobilisations in Dublin City and in Cork and places against the far right. At the end of last year, outside the Dáil, they tried to have a free speech rally. Like, well, now what does that even mean, free speech? And they want to come out and call people racist slogans and things. So I think that's the right. Like, they were opposed in Cork by Republican Socialists. They were opposed in Dublin by Republican Socialists. Like, I believe people will wake up.
Yeah, I think one of them said again. Well, we've all agreed that not the same post anybody anywhere, but one of them said words of consequences, because they seem to have these wee macho this like need to throw out these like macho sound bites, and one of them said words of consequences. Well, they do, because if the far right are allowed to rally and they're allowed to go into areas that are disadvantaged, where a lot of poverty and disenfranchisement and understandable anger, and they're allowed to say words, right, inflammatory words which would suggest that vulnerable sections of society aren't welcome, well, the consequences of their words will be very severe, and we've seen it in Europe, we've seen it in England, and this brings us round to, do we have a right as the Republican left to allow these people to express their words?
Well, there's a historical tradition within the Republican left of combating the far right on the streets and not platforming them and deplatforming them and opposing their mobilisations and shutting them down. Like, you look back through Republican history, left Republican history, it's all there. In the 70s and the 60s, they were shut down. But what's dangerous is, like, if you look at the likes of Fine Gael and their historical background and where they come from, like, a lot of establishment people, a lot of free staters, a lot of people with the who are in power, secretly and privately would agree with the message that's coming out of the far right, but that's where they come from. So we have to be careful that these people are being allowed to articulate this. These people are being kind of left alone. You don't see too many of far right people or National Party people or whoever. You don't see them getting locked in front of the Special Criminal Court and getting whacked 4.5 years for membership of one of their far right organisations. It's Republicans, but I believe Republicans will wake up to the threat of them eventually when we get our heads around it. And I don't think they'll last long, anyway.
There's another interesting point that I want to raise, and it's a thorny issue. It's an uncomfortable issue. But later on, I'll be speaking to young Canis Milne in West Belfast. Now, Canis joined us at one of those marches to confront the far right this time last year.
That's right. Belfast,
and we ended up taking their patch, and that was the last one. But Canis believes not without any. I certainly see where he's coming from. Canis is concerned that what passes for the left in Ireland, right? The left, the people who sell the newspapers in the town, and the people with in the universities, left, that they have misconstrued the socialist message, that they have taken it away from the traditional working class analysis, and that they have injected it with what he believes is too much of an emphasis on lifestyle issues, LGBT issues, perhaps abortion issues that were never central to the class analysis, and that they've taken socialism and turned it into something else. Perhaps looking at like sort of some of the things you see in America, and that his concern is that they've changed the character of the left to the point where it is not inviting to the average young working class male or female, the average working class person, and that it has created a void, and that the far right are about to step into that void.
I think you can characterise that just with the internal ebb and the flow within the left. Like a woman's right to choose is it's her choice. Do you know? It doesn't belong to anybody else other than the individual who is like a part of the collective society. Like,
but even with that argument, right? Sorry for cutting over you, but even with that argument, and we all have our own opinions on that. I mean, there are elements on the left that will take that argument and spend years on it, you know, to the detriment of class politics, even. You know, who will that they're, you know, the concern being that socialism and now in the minds of the public means something else than it did when we were learning socialism through reading James Connolly, for example. That socialism. Oh, that's socialism. You must. Oh, you're the gays about the gay. You're the gay people, yeah, or the abortion people, yeah. You know that, and I can see. I really can see, because you know I was, you know, when I was in my late teens and that I was attending different left wing meetings, and the you know, Canis has a point. You know, he has a point. There is an overt focus on lifestyle issues to the detriment of working class issues, a focus on linguistics, a focus on the type of words that you use, you know, which becomes tiring after a while. You know, it's tiring for normal people to have to listen to, you know, you have a range of rules. You're on the left, you have to know this, you have to know this, you have to say this, you have to stay away from that word. It's nonsense, a lot of it, like. And into the void steps the far right, saying, do you know what, you don't have to think at all, this is where your problem is. And meanwhile the left are talking, are pulling people over the type of nouns that you use.
100% here, and I think, like, personally now, for somebody that was involved in the Right to Choose campaign, and as you know yourself, Ken, I was a member of Together for Yes, and I campaigned to repeal it. But the me, like, doing that, it was something that happened, and I believe it's over now, and there's a consensus there now that it was the correct thing to do, and it's time to move past it. You know, like, people who are lifestylists and people who build their whole socialist ethos around cultural Marxism or concepts like that, they're nearly irrelevant to normal working class people in the housing estates, or if you're, like, struggling to pay your mortgage, or if your bills.
Can we focus on that term? Sorry to interrupt you again, but can we focus on that term, cultural Marxism, because it was said a lot last year. It was said in Belfast a lot last year. One of their speakers, one of the far right speakers, was trying to talk, and we hadn't managed to drown him out yet. He came off with this term, cultural Marxism. Now, if cultural Marxism exists, then it is a scary concept. You know, the concept of the, you know, it's not just about the class struggle now. It's about sort of social design. Let's look at let's look at the family. Let's revisit the merit of the family.
The right wing definitely would love us to chase our tails all day long around, like, the cultural Marxist world or the concepts that's in it. But to me, like the cultural Marxism at the beginning, I thought meant, like, a culture of resistance. You know, like, when I first heard the term, you know, like,
I know, is it? Yeah,
the culture of Marxist resistance, and then
like raffles or something, like, you know, yeah.
Whenever I kind of scratched the surface of it, then I was kind of going, all right, is that what that is? Well, it's irrelevant here in the day-to-day struggles of working people.
Yeah.
It's like, here, if somebody wants to have an abortion, like, it's their individual choice. It's a socio-economic choice. It's like a pregnancy and a child that affects the rest of your life. It changes you. It changes everything about you. Like, no,
but see what you've said there. That, I mean, it's what I like about what you're saying is you're saying something that a lot of the let's call them the university left, right, will not say. They will not concede that there is a socio-economic link to the woman's choice, right? That there's a link between the material conditions that the woman is living in and her subsequent choice. Because once they do that, that suggests that abortion is not necessarily something marvellous, right? Some people in that world, I find, and this adds to the whole theory, conspiracy theory about culture and Marxism, some people are openly celebrating. I mean, the people who celebrated in Dublin, for example, they danced about like. This adds weight to the theory on cultural Marxism. That there's something less wholesome going on, and maybe the more traditional elements of the working class will then buy into the far right's condemnation of abortion because of. Do you see them? I'm trying to say.
See the entire issue. It's really emotive. It pulls people's heartstrings, and it's really controversial. But the thing, there's no simple black and white solution to that, right? To that issue of abortion, right? And it's the same as there's no simple black and white solution to the situation around workers or migrant workers or there's no simple solution to the areas of culture and like the far right's concepts of who a pure Irish blood person would be, and it's far too complex for simple ideas. But like, if you want to go and watch a YouTube video on racism or the far right, you get really simple solutions to complex problems all the time. And that's what people just want, the simple solution, and then they're pulled into it.
Michael, where would Republican Socialists differ from the rest of the Irish left when it comes to confronting the far right? I know that last year when we walked into town, I think on the third occasion we decided just not even to stand with the rest of the left. I have my theory why that is. Can you shed a bit of light on the differences between possibly Republican Socialists and
definitely what you'll see is Republican Socialism is organically working class socialism. Like people, 9 times out of 10 when you talk to a Republican Socialist, you'll find out that they're a socialist out of pure necessity, because they've seen the grow up of capitalism, of neoliberalism. They've seen their parents struggle, they've seen their communities struggle, they've poverty, deprivation, whatever, and they've had an awakening through socialism, through a class consciousness. So the Republican Socialism is there's a great saying there, like that you'll never get a Republican Socialist philosopher, because the train of thought is between thinking and actions too quick. People just are all act. So you're going to find, and this goes from across the broad spectrum of the Republican left, you're going to find that the more the far right mobilise, the more the Republican left will mobilise in opposition to them.
Yeah. Aye. Where do you think it's going for them? I mean, they're not. I mean, you made a great point. We spoke on the phone earlier that their electoral outing in the last general election just exposed that they were irrelevant, mostly only to themselves. But in saying that, yes, very small number of votes, but in saying that, like, I don't remember an Irish far right growing up. I'm in my 40s now, and I don't remember in my teens, my 20s, or my 30s there even being an Irish far right. Now there is, you know.
Yeah, I think they were kind of always there in the background. They were kind of like the Fine Gael type people were always racist and always on the far right. When you scratch the surface, I think they were always there, but the national liberation struggle was at its height, and like any people raising their head above the parapet like that, there, like, would have got chopped off in the blink of an eye. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
So I think that they believe now that there's relative peace and there's kind of like there's the armed republicanism, for want of a better phrase, is kind of took a step back and we're kind of looking at a political road to solve the national liberation struggle. I think they're getting a wee bit confident. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
But, like, we'll see.
We will. We'll see. Okay, Michael, I hope you're doing all right up there. I hope the clan's all right.
Aye, good man. All good. Come here, and Kieran, take care of that woman of yours up there.
You too, man. When's Kieran due?
7th of June. We were just down for a scan today.
Yeah.
Well, Kieran was down. I couldn't go on. And all perfectly healthy. All
Brilliant.
Doing well. So we're looking forward to the wee man coming.
Well, there's yourself, there's myself and Charlene, obviously, and my good friend and comrade Andrew down in Uri, all expecting kids in the middle of a COVID crisis. I think there's one or two in the IRSP party chat as well, expecting in the middle of it. So there'll be plenty of.
We should never support this referendum, because I think the concept of demographics has gone to everybody's head.
Alright, man. Listen, have a good one.
Right. That'll do.
See ya.
Good,
Take
man.
care, Slans.
Right, Slans.
So with me live on the phone down in County Kerry is one David Hopkins. David's an anti-fascist activist all his life. He's a Republican Socialist as well, and I think you're a student. You're going back to full-time study. David, at the same age as myself, fair play to it. It's not easy. How you doing down there?
No, not too bad. Thanks a lot. Thanks for inviting me on the show.
No problem.
Yeah, I'm just come back to try and do computer science. It's tough enough at this age, 40 odd, to go back to school, but that's the way it is.
Is it a degree? Aye, it's a computer science degree.
Yeah. It's a computer science degree I'm trying to do. I was involved in the bar trade for a number of years, and I got sick a good few years. Well, I got sick about 4 years ago, so I decided to change routine and try something new. So,
fair play to you. Best luck with that. I'm more or less in. So listen, we're talking tonight. The topic tonight is countering the lies of the Irish far right. And as we spoke earlier, and as we explained, we're not going to give these guys any specific oxygen of publicity. We won't be signposting anybody towards them. But what sort of sparked this off, I think, was the incident around Keelings. Keelings is like a fruit picking firm, and they began to get a bit active last week. Can you explain what happened there, the dynamics of what happened there, Guy?
Well, basically, Keelings, as with an awful lot of agri-business, tend to rely heavily on short-term migrant workers. These workers are often in very, 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 very low pay. There's a certain amount of question marks over that. But I'll get into the basics how this there is. Ryanair, another company that wouldn't have the best workers' rights either, had chartered a flight to pick up 187 workers from Bulgaria to fly into Dublin Airport. They flew to Sofia, picked up the workers and flew back to Dublin Airport. This was filmed by someone in Dublin Airport with the workers arriving in, and it was discovered that the workers were heading off to Keelings as part of their seasonal strawberry picking crew. Now the far right have latched onto this, saying that there's plenty of people being laid off. Why aren't Irish workers employed? Why are the foreigners coming in? And they're using COVID as a kind of an excuse to say that this is not right. Now the judgment on both Ryanair and Keelings to charter such a flight, the conditions obviously wouldn't be safe for all the workers involved, but Bulgaria does have one of the lowest rates of COVID in Europe at the minute.
Yeah.
But basically they've lamped onto this as the champion Irish workers, in a blatant racist, discriminatory manner.
And it follows the pattern, sorry for cutting across you, Dahi, but it follows, and I did look into it when you had mentioned it, and it follows the familiar pattern with the far right, which is fear, an easy target, and the manipulation of the truth. Yeah.
Well, basically, yeah. Sorry. Not just about manipulation and exploitation. They twist the facts as well to suit their own agenda. They have no care for the migrant workers. For example, there was no big uproar in 2018 when United Union tried to highlight some of the stories about Keelings and the work conditions. There was no big hullabaloo then.
Yeah.
There's a hullabaloo now because of Keelings' poor PR judgment, the disaster judgment to charter a flight and bring people in. If this had been in any sort of semi-normal times, this would not be an issue.
Yeah. What I want to do, I want to get into confronting several major planks of their ideology, right? And the first is this notion that they are patriotic, right? That they are uber patriotic. And I'm not. I won't claim to be anything within Irish Republicanism ever. But I was attending Republican marches when they weren't allowed to happen. 1981 and that, and pretty much been around the circles ever since. I don't remember any of these people. Not one of them. I cannot place one of them within either the Republican struggle, the national liberation struggle, either the political level or any other level. I don't remember any of them.
Well, I've been an activist for nearly 20 years. I've been involved in housing and other issues, and I've discovered I haven't come across any of these people. Even the ringleaders, I've never come across any of them in any of those actually even common social issues. I haven't come across them. Never mind the so-called patriotic stuff they espouse. Even in Republican circles, none of these people would have had a widely known name. No. They're certainly not patriotic. They espouse everything that's against what even the proclamation espouses. They go against nearly everything in that piece. So they're certainly not patriots. Yeah. And they exploit certain agendas or certain problems to suit their own agenda. Yeah. And they offer very simple solutions to very complex issues, but the simple solutions that they do offer are impractical and they don't add up when you look into them properly. That's
kind of why we decided, and just some friends who are involved with the podcast here, and we had the debate, do we even talk about them? Are we giving them too much credence by talking about them? And we sort of said, well, we do need to debunk their lies, and one of the lies is we've covered the false patriotism. The other thing is the complete refusal to recognise the class analysis, the class pressures, the capitalism places upon the market, and that capitalism is in fact the core difficulty in which both those poor migrant workers and our own native workers, if you want to call them that, are placed in. Can you go into the class analysis of anti-fascism, David, and explain why we are so different from these idiots?
Well, basically, our analysis would be that every worker deserves a decent living wage, deserves a fair day's pay for a fair day's work. Yeah. This is not rocket science. So any worker coming to this country deserves the same rights, wages as a native worker, but neither of them should be exploited. So our own workers should not be exploited. Neither should anyone coming into this country seeking to work should be exploited. Yeah. And a lot of people who are second and third generations of Irish people who've travelled across the water were exploited equally as much. So why should we say, you can do it to this person, but you can't do it to that person? It's completely, it's just, first of all, it's not right. and second of all, it's devoid of all proper argument.
Yeah.
And that's every worker, like, it's the whole Keeling situation, and it's not just Keeling, there'll be other companies involved as well. There'll be mushroom picking later in the year, there'll be other leaks, there'll be other agri businesses that will require seasonal workers. The problem with seasonal work is that it's just that it's seasonal.
Yeah.
So for a huge number of people within society, it's unsuitable to apply for seasonal work because you're not guaranteed. It's very, very hard to get a mortgage if you're a seasonal worker. It's very hard to fit into what we would call day-to-day working if you're a seasonal worker. So you may have to rely on government subsidies when you're not working. And for people that want to return for full-time wage, such work is not suitable. So this leads back to the exploitive nature. And what a lot of these companies do is they hire in people from Eastern Europe, give them a completely substandard wage, work them through huge long hours. In the UK, for example, the Gang Masters and Labour Abuse Authority have said 67% of their workforce, the agri workers, come from Bulgaria. They often work between 60 and 80 hours a week, often 7 days a week, and are often paid under the minimum wage. And the other thing these companies do is they cap the workers' pay at 40 hours a week, but say they got €500 or €400, but very often the amount of work and hours that they put in, grueling work that they've put in, would make the average hourly wage well below the national minimum wage. And it also, the conditions that these people live in are absolutely horrendous. They reckon something like 40 to 50% live in substandard, mouldy, unsanitary caravans and prefab buildings, and they're just totally unsuitable for living conditions. And this has to be highlighted. So if Keelings come back and they show that they pay they pay the minimum rate, that the accommodation the workers in is more than above standard, then I have no problems with workers coming in to the country to work for Keelings. But my suspicion is that this is not happening. That's why I'd be against such a move. But the far right are jumping on it as a them and us.
Yeah.
Whereas all the workers together should be standing together fighting for rights.
Like I just don't. I just don't get it. I mean, I don't consider myself a traditional left winger, if that makes sense. I'm a Republican socialist. I'm not. Like I go to mass. You know what I mean? Like I've my own particular opinions on abortion and that, but I cannot fathom the mindset of an individual who focuses on the most vulnerable individual he can see and decides to try to make a political career out of bullying them. It's horrific on that level, alone, not to mention politically. What do you think drives these guys, David?
Well, basically, anytime life doesn't go right, it's easy to blame someone else. So there's a small aspect of that. I suspect that some of these people who've recently come to prominence, years ago they were off doing other jobs, and to me there could be a financial aspect as why some of the people have come into prominence.
I've noticed that.
It's not rocket science to figure that bit out. Any Google search will reveal that. I don't want to name the names, but I'm sure people have an idea.
Well, there's a guy there, and he's just constantly scrounging for money. Like, he's just donate to me, and you can see what his game is. There's a few of them getting in the merchandise now, and the far right merchandise. Like, we're both the same age. You'll remember, the Blood and Honour malcontents and that there from back in the early 90s, and the merchandise was very, very lucrative. Far right merchandise is a very lucrative business. Like,
and they're being funded by other elements, and again, you don't have to. A small bit of research online will help you determine who's funding it and where the majority of that funding is coming from.
Yeah.
It links back to a lot of the conspiracy theories as well, that the far right put out. It's to create fear, mistrust, and their whole agenda is divide and conquer. The last thing they want is workers standing up for workers' rights. The last thing they want is mass mobilisation of the working class, being class conscious and knowing their rights.
Yeah.
Whereas it's like the old, you often see it, there's 20 cookies. The banker takes 19 cookies and he leaves one left to you.
Yeah.
But he tells you that immigrant wants to steal your cookie.
Yeah.
It's that kind of they thrive in that sort of analysis. You know, the bogeyman. It's Nazi Germany used the Jews. Different part for a number of years, America used the Islam and Muslims. There's always a bogeyman. They try and create this. They want to take over mentality.
Yeah. How do we deal with it, David? How do we respond to fascism?
There's two ways of fighting fascism. One is not giving it any platform whatsoever. Now, unfortunately, that leads you down to a road of aggression because that's the only language the far right seem to understand. But the other way, and the way kind of I prefer people saying going is arguing at them, is debating with them, is showing them that, you know, the divide and conquer, and showing the working class that that whole analysis of divide and conquer keeps us as a class down. It doesn't help us in any way. Whereas if we stand together and go for full workers' rights, that you know, it's easier to achieve if we're all working together and not against each other.
That's right.
But it's you have to break down them barriers, and that'll be and expose the lies of the far right. That's crucial.
Yeah. David, it's been great having you on. I hope you're staying safe down there, man.
Cheers,
and best luck with your studies. Slan. So with me on the line from West Belfast is 20-year-old Canis Milne. Canis is an anti-fascist activist. He's a Republican Socialist activist, and he's a labourer. How you doing, Canis?
I'm grand. What about yourself?
Not too bad. Canis, last year, myself and yourself and many others marched into Belfast city centre. I think it was on 3 occasions, 3 Saturdays, in order to confront what you could call the far right. They were a amalgamation of sort of businessmen, hooligans and other malcontents. What was going on there, Canis?
Well, basically what it was there were certain groups and individuals, probably more prominent in the likes of England, who had come over and basically try to organise the kind of elements of loyalism that probably even loyalism wouldn't even have wanted. You know, the football hooligans, the old National Front Neanderthals, people who have basically been relics for years.
Yeah.
That's kind of the people these people come over to kind of target. But one of the reasons I went down to oppose them was because the way they were recruiting in loyalist areas was they were using historical cases such as Ballymurphy and Bloody Sunday as ways to point score and ways to try and scare the loyalist community into thinking by someone being trialed for something like murder was an attack on their identity. So they were capitalising on people's grievances.
Yeah.
And that was one of the things that drove me, probably more from a Republican point of view as well, to go down and physically oppose the vermin that were gathering in my city, because it's not their city. They come over here from Britain.
Like, it was strange. I mean, they turned up 3 times, and the last time the far, okay, Belfast always had loyalism, and you know, there's a debate there as to the degree of
fascism within loyalism.
Yeah, but the last time the far right had organised in Belfast prior to this was early 80s, and it was at the NF march.
Yeah, and then it turned to close the NF here as well.
But then we had this upsurge of like 3 manifestations in the space of a few months, and it was strange. Like, but you know, and we went in and we did what had to be done. But it was like, what to you? I want to sort of confront, and this is what this is about, confronting the Irish far right, because we're seeing this, and we're seeing a resurgence, or not a resurgence, probably the first manifestation since the blue shirts in the south. We're seeing these guys trying to get up on the ground. What do you think is the motivating factor here behind these guys?
Behind the resurgence of Irish quote-unquote fascism.
Yeah.
They're just basically trying to copy what's happening around the rest of the world, and the material conditions here don't really facilitate any thought like that. And it's the fact that they're coming off with this nationalist, like, to be far right, one of the key components that the far right universally use is nationalism.
Yeah.
But we're having people who are coming here sitting saying that they're the vanguards of nationalism, but where were they in the 80s?
Yeah.
Where were they in the 70s, and where were they in the 90s?
Yeah.
Now, I know probably it sounds hypocritical and probably sounds a wee bit stupid, me saying stuff like that, being 20 and saying
No, it doesn't.
about figures like this, but the whole thing is, I've never heard of any of these people, and these are people coming out far older than me who could have done something, trying to be pillars of nationalism when people were being shot down on the streets for being nationalist, and these people were nowhere to be seen. Yet in peacetime they want to come out, well, quote unquote peacetime, they want to come out with a whole militant nationalist banner. They're late to the party, and if anything, it's a costume party for them.
I spoke to David Hopkins down in Kerry earlier, and he made the exact same point. I mean, I would take it further. I can think of one or two of them of the far right who were about in the 80s, and they were quite supportive of Catholics getting shot dead in the street. On the greener side of the far right, we both agreed that we could not place one single far right activist within the Republican struggle, even though they were well within the age. I can't remember one face or name, not a single one.
No.
So, however, they are describing themselves as patriots. Yeah.
But this is the dangerous thing. They're going to use Republicanism as a vehicle to get into the debate, because it's going to be kind of the same tactics that the likes of, well, I'm not going to mention groups, but other groups use, where you plaster Republican imagery. You don't necessarily have to espouse Republican politics, but if you espouse the imagery, certain figures, certain flags, certain emblems, people will mistake that for republicanism and go towards it. And I think that the far right are going to try and slide in there and come off with the whole patriot persona, but the whole thing is that not a single one of them are patriots. Not one of them have done anything for national liberation whatsoever. They've sat and walked the halls of power all their life. They've more than likely been born into middle class homes, never had to struggle for anything in their lives, and the only reason that they're in the position of power that they're in within politics is more than likely because of the southern political structure, where you can use money to advance yourself politically in the south, because it's a corrupt state. That is why we don't have much nationalist far right figures in the north. It's because the majority of the people here are working class and don't have the avenues that would breed such an ideology. So
do you think that's what we're seeing in the south? You're seeing people with
we're seeing the Trinity College mob. This is who it is. It's the blue shirts who are trying to get a bit radical on it and trying to go down the O'Duffy route and want to be a bit militant, but don't want to be seen as being tarred with the Republican brush because it is the south.
What do you say? Because this is one of, and we didn't necessarily see eye to eye with all of those on the left when we marched into the Belfast last year. What do you say to, although it was amicable enough in the end, but what do you say to those who suggest that some of the failures, maybe the aesthetic failures, the political oversights within the traditional left in Ireland are contributing somewhat to the cynicism amongst the youth, which can then drive them into the hands of the far right?
Well, speaking as someone who has been very, very close to that, and I'm not really ashamed to say that, because it's got me to the level now where I'm actually able to warn people about it.
Yeah.
But the way it is identity politics is choking the left and choking it to death, and young people don't want that. That's alright for middle class Americans and students who walk the halls of Cambridge and Queen's University and want to identify as whatever they want. But see young working class men and women who are struggling day by day, working dead end jobs for money. See, when we see stuff like that being put at the forefront of the left, we don't want to be part of it.
And when you say identity politics, this is very important, because I don't want anybody to get the wrong end of the stick here. What you're saying is that, and I would agree with you to no small extent, that there has been a replacement amongst the left, a replacement of the traditional class struggle analysis.
I don't think that the left even see a working class anymore. I think they see there's black class, there's white working class, there's a gay working class, non-binary working class, there's all these different subsections. I think people need to just start looking at the working class as one group, and it's when you start to reduce it that all these subsections, anyone would say, doesn't represent me. I can't speak for every young person, but when I see stuff like that happening to the left, it does near enough push me to the right.
An overt focus on issues that are not necessarily class driven. Yeah.
I'm going to be honest here, and I'm going to say that honestly, my view is that now that modern left campaigning on stuff like that sex workers work, sex workers unionise, abortion on demand, things like this, it's disconnecting ordinary workers from the left. Some 20-year-old student sitting in London on a Rapomac drinking a Starbucks coffee doesn't speak for someone down on a building site shoveling sand into a wheel. That is to the people who are controlling the left and give it back to us workers. That's what we want.
I want to talk about debunking another myth, and that is that foreign labour is the cause of the problems of native labour. Yeah.
That is, if you're going to talk about labour in general, there's only one thing that can impact labour, and that's capital.
Yeah.
And people seem to use foreign workers, and this is these people are foreign workers. We can't claim to be on the left and negate the fact that they're coming here to do a job, and that many of the people who would probably cry about them wouldn't do that job in the first place, but that's beside the point. That capitalism is always going to be the problem. The only reason foreign labour is here is because capitalists and the class of bosses are able to underpay foreign labour to do jobs that local labour won't do. It's not, let's say for an example, a Romanian or a Polish family's fault for working in a factory more hours, and it's the boss who probably lives down the street from the worker sitting up in the office on probably £90,000 a year. That's who the problem lies with. It doesn't lie with some family struggling, but that's where the far right capitalises off. But people don't realise that these people being the Romanians and the Polish and Russians are coming over to take your jobs. They're shaking hands at the end of the day, because that's the ones who keep them and the platforms they're on. That's who funds their whole campaign. It's always been the bosses. And people like the new far rights who are coming out in Ireland today don't deny that, because they're corporatists by ideology. They want corporations to have free reign over all the land, and if you do that, you're going to have more foreign labour. You're going to have people getting paid next to nothing, and that's not very niceness coming from the far right who want to supposedly preserve and protect this country's worker.
How do we deal with them, Kenneth? How do we deal with the far right?
You know fine rightly how we deal with them.
Okay. Enough said there. Well, listen, you stay safe, young man, and keep your family safe. And we'll talk to you again soon. No problem, Kenneth. Take care.
Thank you for having me.
No problem.